Welcome to Leadership from the Cross with Pastor Scott Thom. This broadcast is devoted to taking your ministry and life to the next level. No matter what the level you are at, let us help advance your leadership skills. Leadership from the Cross is a ministry of Cross Christian Fellowship in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And now, Pastor Scott Thom.
You can learn from good examples and bad examples. Most of the time we focus on the good, right? If you want to know what leadership is like, you follow this person. They're a great leader, but don't think that you can't learn from a bad leader. They all have some good qualities. And even if they have very few, you can learn from their bad leadership. Matter of fact, sometimes being under a bad leader will impact you in your life, in your ministry, in a very, very positive way. Because once you experience being under a bad leader, those bad decisions and things that you've gone through, it can become a very visceral, personal, emotional experience that will weld onto you and implant into you an idea that I don't want to be that way when I become a leader, when I become a parent, when I get placed into a position of authority. And it helps you not to be that kind of a leader, not to follow that kind of example. So let's learn from some bad leadership characteristics. I want to cover 5 here. I don't want to do more than that. 5 will be plenty for this. I'll probably add some others later on in upcoming episodes. But let's look at characteristics of bad leadership. That's bad. But we're going to find a lot of good out of it, right? And some of these things you'll pick up on, you already know, you could list them, and some of the things you're going to be shaking your head like, yeah, I totally agree with that. Because you've been under it, you've experienced it, or maybe we've experienced it ourselves. I mean, some of these things I've done as a leader. So I've learned from experience. I've also learned from the experience of others and then experiencing it underneath another leader. So number 1 would be indecision. What's a bad characteristic of leadership? Indecisiveness, indecision. Not able to come to a decision or make a serious decision on time. And that could be due to a number of things. I think the first thing it would cause indecision, which we see as just very common, is not able to assess the circumstances and take an action, of course. Always trying to think, well, what if this changes, or what if that changes, or what if this? And people warn me about this or that, and I understand that. But here's the problem with that. You're never going to have complete understanding, complete mastery over a circumstance and over a decision. You've got to make a decision. Now, there are times when you need to just wait. It's like I've done everything I can. I'm up against a wall and doors that are closed, or a rock in a hard place, so to speak. But I really have to wait on God because this is God's call here. And this would be something like Saul. So here he's going to battle. They're waiting on Samuel. They want to offer sacrifice to the Lord and seek the Lord's will. And he's starting to feel peer pressure. And so he's indecisive. Instead of being decisive, like, look, guys, we're just going to wait on the Lord. I know you're upset. I know you're scared. I know these, but let's just wait on the Lord, no matter how long it takes. Have faith. Trust in the Lord. Let's go to prayer and call upon the Lord and humble ourselves. Instead, he exalted himself, put himself in the place of hero, in the place of the prophet, in the place of the priest, and offered a sacrifice. And that's a bad decision. It's always a bad decision not to wait on at least some direction from God. Jesus said, "Can the blind lead the blind?" Luke 6:33. And I know he's talking about people who are spiritually blind, resisting his calling, but really it's a principle that goes in there that if you don't have enough information from God, truly don't, to make a proper decision, then don't lead blindly. Tell the people why I'm waiting. There's just too much in stake here to move forward without knowing the answers to these things. If you don't know, and I don't know, God knows, let's wait on God. The second biggest problem I see in indecision is that some people are just afraid to make a decision. And this is what we were talking about. They just always think that it's going to change and it's the wrong decision. Look, you're going to have those, but most people will follow a leader that's decisive rather than indecisive. Because a leader that makes a decision and it turns out to be a wrong decision because everybody had bad information, really is not going to catch a lot of blame. They're going to say, well, he did that, we headed down, but who knew? Nobody knew. Nobody knew that was going to happen. We started down this road and then we got this huge obstacle and huge bill and now our resources dried up, but who would know? We didn't know that. This is the income we were promised, or this is income we went by the past 2 years. We just projected we'd have the same income. And you've got to go with that. Nehemiah, he waited on God, and God opens up circumstances, did that. But when he did, boom, he was off. He made good, sound, clear decisions ahead of time that when the doors open up, here's what I need. When the king asked him, and then he gulped and prayed that prayer, help, Lord, he said, this is why I'm so sad. My city's broken down. The walls are broken down. The gates are burned. My people are in despair. How can I be happy when your loved ones are in peril? And so it's one of Xerxes' cities too, at least at the moment, right? He doesn't want it to be overrun by somebody else. So, hey, Nehemiah, what is it going to take, and when are you going to be back? He had the answers. I need a letter for this, a letter for that. Give me lumber from the king's lumber yard, and then send me out with these guys to watch over us so I don't have robbers come up, take away what you've justly given us. And it doesn't record it, but he asked for a time response, and obviously he gave it because the king let him go. So he was very decisive, but he waited on God. So that's what you do. And you don't give in to peer pressure. Even after he left, Sanballat, Tobiah, these guys are putting peer pressure on Nehemiah, but he didn't bend to that. He made his decision. He had to change a few things. He had to encourage the people. He had to have them work with a weapon in one hand and a trowel in the other. But hey, those are things people understand. You adjust your decision, but this overall decision to build didn't change. Once the decision is made, act definitively. But the only way you can do that is if you have a definitive plan, a definite plan, a idea of where you're going and what it's going to take. And then think it through. Think through the steps, and God opens the doors. You announce it, and then you move. And that way you don't have to backtrack. You've taken your time. You waited on God. You waited on the circumstance. You did your best that you could. You're rarely going to have to backtrack or change directions time after time after time. That's where people don't like a leader where he's like, let's move this way because he's all excited. And then, oh, no, let's move this way. He's all excited that way. Well, at least he's a leader and he's moving. And usually something happens. You know, like they say, a blind squirrel finds a nut every now and then, right? A leader that's out there doing something but fails a lot will usually succeed even by accident because God blesses. But you can overdo that. So have a plan and you do that. The second thing that is a characteristic of a bad leader is complaining about the lack of resources. Not racehorses, resources. That old comedy bit. You complain about the lack of resources. There's a couple reasons why you wouldn't do this. One is, no matter how fast the dog is at the racetrack, the mechanical rabbit will always go faster. They just speed it up. So you may have accomplished your vision. The next idea, the next vision, the next thing that comes down the pike is something that is going to be a step of faith too, probably. Usually is in ministry, and it's always going to outpace your resources. To complain about that is bad leadership. No matter where your ministry is, it might not be doing very well at all. Don't complain about the resources. Well, we don't have enough people to do that. We don't have enough money. We don't have enough. Well, what do you have enough people to do? What do you have enough money to do? Don't accept limited resources as a defeat. Everything grows. See, God wants to use you as a steward, a wise steward. And if you're not faithful in the small things, how's he going to grant you greater things? If you're not faithful in the small resources you have, you're not going to be faithful in the big resources. So enjoy the process, enjoy the people, enjoy the learning that you're going through. Otherwise, if you start complaining, you're going to get covetous. You're going to get desirous. You're going to want to seek after those things that are not yours, like Gehazi, the servant of Elisha. He served Elisha really well until Naaman came along, right? 2 Kings 5, and then Naaman gets upset and takes off, and he finally dips himself in the Jordan 7 times, comes up, his leprosy's healed, but he had this great wealth that he brought, and he had wanted to give it away, and Elisha says, I'm not doing this for profit. I'm not serving God just for profit. You go on your way so you know that there's a God in heaven. But Gehazi, he became covetous. He wanted the resources. These are things that, man, if I only had this, then I would have handmaids and female servants, male servants. I would have cattle and land and buildings and all this, and I could really serve the Lord then. He was rebuked by Elisha, right? He came back and he goes, did not my heart go with you? In other words, it's like saying, man, I saw everything. My heart broke, man. I knew you were going to do this. You were in a mode of poor me. When you complain about resources, complain about your position, complain about what's coming in all the time, you set yourself up to fall. The enemy it's easy for the enemy to come in and trip you up. Second reason why I think we complain about resources is that in complaining about it, we want people to sympathize with us. Oh, I don't have enough people, don't have enough money, don't have enough good ideas, and we pass the buck, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But also, it's terrible because it makes you seem powerless, and it makes you seem like you have a weak God. Who's the God you serve? And pretty soon, everybody around you will take that kind of attitude or leave. Followers begin to become like their leaders. And if you complain, they'll complain. And it also starts building a let's just occupy, not take territory mentality. It's a mentality that, well, we just do what we can do with what we got, but we're not going to go out on a limb. We're not going to walk by faith. We're not going to dream. We will just do status quo. We will just stay in this rut. And a lot of places like this. And that's why a lot of ministries in mainstream ministries fall short when they could do so much better because they set limitations on themselves. We'll build these buildings, we'll buy the property, and we'll make sure that these buildings house about 120 people. And that's the size of the church. And if we have that, then we're successful. And when you don't, you can complain, but the problem is people see that there's no real vision. They can buy in because there's community, maybe there's good teaching, but there's no vision beyond that because you've already put a limiter, you've already put a governor. This is the size of the congregation and no more. Yeah, they can go to multiple services, but it's rare that they do. Some are good, and some have really good leaders in a small, limited space, but it's the limited mindset of certain mainstream ministries. When you complain about things, you fall into those types of mindsets. So David, he didn't think small. David, when he wanted to build the temple or tabernacle, from the tabernacle to a temple, a permanent home for the Lord shut him down in building it, but he's like, well, he didn't say I couldn't set up stuff for my son. I may be a warrior guy and not the one to build it, but I'm going to lay up a plethora of building materials here for the new temple. When it comes about, all have already granted them resources for their vision. And so David didn't have a limited mindset, man. He always thought big and let's go for it and we'll do it somehow. Same thing with us. Before we started this podcast and our No Other Doctrine podcast and other things, we were already planning out our college, and all we were was a small church in Albuquerque, New Mexico. We hadn't planted our first church. This was about 6 years ago. We didn't have a school. We didn't have a training program. We started with 5 people. And from that 5, then we went to the 18, and then for 2 years and trained them up, started getting churches planted, and then went up to 29, and then went up into the 30s, and then we're into the 40s, and then we started our online school. And in just 6 years, we went from 5 people to 140 people in the last 4 months. You start small. You just build what you have. And we started laying the groundwork for 5 years from now. We're all already starting to lay the groundwork for the next 20 years, when we're going to push and we're going to get 3,000 to 5,000 students in there. And if we do that, then we'll get our 100 churches planted. Take slow steps and grow. And as you gain more resources, you can go. The third thing is shifting responsibility. Characteristics of bad leaders is that they shift responsibility to others. They refuse to take responsibility. They play the blame game, right? It's not so much that we don't have resources or whatever. It's always it's our staff. It's our staff, or it's the people around us, or it's the followers, or it's the workers, or it's the people in the church. They just don't get evangelism. They just never bring anybody. Well, you're the leader. Take some responsibility. And people love to follow leaders like that. Accept responsibility, especially when you're wrong. And even if you're not wrong, accept it for the team. If you're the leader, take the hits sometimes. The team doesn't play well, and you did a great job coaching them. Sometimes you need to step up and go, hey, it's my fault. They didn't play well or whatever. And you step up. And if they're not a good player, eventually move on from them. But you're picking the players. You're picking the plays. You're coaching them. Take some responsibility. I think the other part in the blame game and not taking responsibility is always moving the responsibility. Well, I'd love to do that for you, but it's out of my hands. I'm not the responsible one. Talk to my overseer. Or when giving responsibilities, don't give authority. Here's your responsibility, but here's no authority. Or here's your responsibility and your authority, but then this person has the same responsibility and the same authority, and causing 2 masters. Remember what Jesus said about that. No one can serve 2 masters. You're going to cling to one or despise the other, love the one, hate the other, because you're going to have this clash of having too many cooks in the kitchen. You can only have one master cook, only one true leader in an area, and don't have multiple, and because no one knows who's in charge. Okay, you're in charge, but you're in charge of what? Do you know what you're in charge of? I don't. And then what happens is, even if people have enough authority and have responsibility, it stymies the action because you don't want to step on everybody's toes. So everybody kind of sits back and see if somebody else will take the leadership, and playing this blame game by accusing people, but you haven't given them the right leadership skills and authority, and then blaming them is terrible leadership. So give responsibility and authority and resources clearly. When Moses gave the original detail for how to build the tabernacle, the instructions on that, it was, this person's doing this. Here's what his gift is. You stick to that. Here's what this person is doing. That's what their gift is. They stick to this. And it's your responsibility to bring in, as the congregation, to bring in the finances, and we'll build the tabernacle. And it worked great, so much so that this wonderful tabernacle, and more money than they had need of, because they finally had to tell the people, stop bringing stuff. The fourth characteristic of bad leadership is abusing the freedoms of leadership. And you've seen that. People who are in leadership, they just abuse the privilege. I worked at a place where we were in the hot warehouse working, pulling parts, and we signed up for that. Okay, I understand. But to be yelled at by your boss, who at times I would walk in, his feet are up, not at lunchtime, his feet are up. He's reading a newspaper. He has multiple newspapers. He loves doing crossword puzzles, and he loves reading the newspaper. So he had like USA Today, he had the local newspaper, and then he had some kind of monthly digest thing that came. And that's what he did half of the time during the day. Then he walks down, not knowing really what's going on, but one order didn't get out or anything, starts yelling and screaming. And you're like, dude, that's kind of an abuse of leadership. You don't even know what's going on. You're always taking credit, but never taking the blame. And you're always taking the best from the situation and never sacrificing for the good of all. That's poor leadership. You've got to be able to give something away. Now, let me say this, and then let me qualify it, okay? Leadership, and good leadership, is proper stewardship of your time, your money, your finances, spreading it out for the people and that sort of thing, using it wisely. Now, I also firmly believe that you need the best or near the best when you use something often, or it's critical to the ministry or the job. Like, don't send people out with bad tools. Okay, you're going to send them to do a job, and you went to the dollar store and you picked up these little socket set wrenches or whatever. Here's your tools, go do the job. And they're out there, oh my gosh, this snapped. I've never had a tool snap in my hands before. You don't want to do that. So I firmly believe that you spend the money where it needs to be spent, and you skimp on areas where you don't need to spend. And that's not being a cheapskate. That's wise and proper use of stewardship. Let me give you an example of this. At another ministry I was at, and we had a great leader there who trained us and said, look, here's why we spend certain money in certain things and other things. And he was unaware of what was going on in the graphic department, because in our graphics department, you had to wait pretty long for your orders or your request to get done. Here's a work order. And I went in one time and like, talked to the guy, Chris, this has to be done, man. He goes, look, I'm sitting here. Here's this thing, the apple's spinning or whatever the apple does, right? And he goes, this just takes forever to render. Even on small things, it can take up to 6 minutes to render, because this is an ancient computer. I'm running newer software on it, but it's not, it doesn't have the clock speed to keep up with any of this. And this should be done in seconds, not take 6 minutes. He goes, so I'm here surfing the web for ideas, or I go get coffee or whatever, come back. And this is going. I said, well, how many times does this happen daily? He goes, oh gosh, at least, I'm rendering stuff all the time because I have an idea and I do it, and then you render it at least 10 times a day. And I went and talked to our administrator and said, look what's going on. And he goes, oh my gosh. And he looked at some things. He goes, here, we need to get him. How much is the new computer? And I said, it's about $2,200. And he's put in requests for it, but it's always been denied. We just don't want to spend the money on that. You have a computer, make it work. And he goes, well, that's just silly on our part. Because look, if it's 6 minutes a day, or 6 minutes every time he renders, and it's 10 times daily, that's an hour a day or 5 hours a week minimum, 20 hours a month. So we're losing half a week, a month in rendering, really 6 weeks a year. This guy's doing nothing while he's sitting watching this computer trying to get the work done. Paying the guy, he looked it up, we're paying the guy like 18 hours times 6 weeks. That's $4,320. A new computer costs $2,200. Look, we save just in him sitting there getting stuff done faster rather than sitting there for 6 minutes watching this thing work. We save $1,300 a year. Plus, that's not even counting the 6 weeks we gain back in his work when he would have been working, right? And so he goes, if you go cheap on some things, you actually hurt the ministry. There's some places where you spend the money. Sometimes you have to ramp up. We don't have the money, so you get the best that you can afford at the time. Don't go into debt. Get what you can. But anything that saves time and helps produce and stops critical errors, spend the money that you need to get it done. Now, that being said, somebody who takes advantage and abuses freedoms of leadership is a bad leader because they use up resources that could be used elsewhere, and they can cause there to be grumbling and other stuff. I also worked for a leader that he just had to have the best of everything. I've seen leaders with elaborate bookshelves, but they don't read any of the books. I've also been under a leader who had way elaborate bookshelves and you had to expand offices, so to speak, in 2 offices. But the guy always had 6 to 10 books on his desk, and I know they were being read because I would go in there and help him with his computer, and they were always on different pages. He's reading different stuff. He's utilizing that library. Okay, great. You utilize it. I think the other guy had a library like that just because he had to top other pastors. Guy has to have the best phone, the best everything, when it's like, hey man, you just got a new phone like 8 months ago, and now you need this phone because it's the best phone coming out. And what, it has one new thing that it does that your old phone doesn't do? Man, kind of let it run its course or whatever. Now, for me personally, I kind of buy the next best technology used or old stock shelf that is new. So in other words, it never got sold and it's an off color like white. Hey, I'm going to put a phone cover on it anyways. So it could be a weird color. Nobody wants brown, or some people want white, but not everybody. And so, hey, I buy it and I get it at a great discount. I'm going to put a protective cover on it anyways. It's not the best technology, but it's next to the best at like 2 or 3 generations cost. So that's what you do. For example, here's this guy coming out with the best technology, and his children's ministry didn't even have a copier. Now, if you're in children's ministry, you know, man, we need to copy things every week. They always had to leave the church, run down to Kinko's and come back. Think about that. Leave the service, run out to Kinko's. They'd have to have a runner, one of the ushers, one of the greeters, somebody run down, make 50 copies of this and come back. Well, that's not good. Judas obviously was the worst example of this. Mary would be a good example of this, using the spices or the ointment, the perfume, so to speak, on Jesus, and it was the best use of that right then. All right, sometimes people have bad characteristics of leading and abusing their position in leadership because they feel like they don't have to hold themselves to the same standard. This is the standard that they have, but it's different from everybody else's. Again, I knew a leader who had a fairly decent-sized church, but probably could have taken it to a mega church if he wanted, or planted churches, or done quite a bit more. But he got to a place where it was comfortable, and even though his people were working, he played golf twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays. He was playing twice a week. For him, he says, well, it relieves my stress. I teach so much better. Oh, yeah, okay. Paul says this, we labor, working with our own hands, being reviled, we bless, being persecuted, we endure. Going through hardship, working to make his living, and then teaching. Not that everybody has to be bivocational, but man, don't act like you're retired and working. And they set their own standard for godly living. Man, don't lead others into temptation and a compromised lifestyle. Hold yourself to the same standard or better as a leader, but they abuse the system because, hey, I can get around this. I run the books, or I'm the man. So I can say, give me that money, or give me a little extra, or do this, or I'm going to take the extra time off when it's not warranted, or whatever it is. Have people in ministry come work on my house. Have things happen where we can actually benefit from this. Know of people who run the ministry, but out of the ministry, they run their own business using all ministry materials and then charging the church for it, but yet taking all the profits. Man, that's no good. The last one that's a characteristic of bad leaders is rejecting authority. Those who reject authority, they can do that just by ignoring leadership over them. We have in 3 John Diotrephes, who wanted to have the preeminence among all the church leaders, and he didn't receive John. Well, you've got to receive. You don't be openly insubordinate. If you have a problem with the leader, go to them in private, talk to them in humility and say, hey, this is going on, this is how I'm feeling, or this is what I'm thinking, or this is what we experienced. Can you help me with this? Can you show me what's going on here? But a leader that openly rejects authority is in big trouble and lacks faith, if you ask me. The Roman centurion, the reason that he had great faith and was recommended by Jesus to the crowd of having an example of faith is because he was a man under authority. He says, all you got to do is say this, and somebody does it, go there, and they go, whatever. He goes, I have the same authority. All you have to do is say the word, and disease will flee. Sickness will move on. But that takes faith that you're not in control, but God is, and you can trust him. People who reject authority tend not to have strong faith. And they tend to openly criticize leadership, putting down leadership, gossiping about leadership. Jude 8 says, likewise, also these dreamers defile the flesh, reject authority, and speak evil of dignitaries. These are people who want to bolster their position by criticizing leaders, discrediting leaders, putting down the chain of command. It only works for a little while because the followers will be like the leaders and they'll say the same thing about you. They're going to criticize you too. They're going to criticize that bad leader. Look, here's the last thing we should say. Always build up leadership. God put them over. Trust that God put them over. He can raise them up. He can take them down. Lift their hands. Do your job. Trust God. Always build up leadership, and God will always reward you. Always. And that is a blessing. All right, these are just 5 points of poor leadership skills and characteristics of poor leaders, but we can learn from the bad and be very good in our leadership. And it's a process. We all are bad leaders in some ways. Admit it, go on, focus on your strengths, admit your weaknesses, build them up as you go along, and trust the Lord. If you do these things with humility and you make mistakes, people will forgive you, they'll follow you, but you just gotta improve in it. And if you improve, people will be excited. They'll buy in. They'll say, hey, we're going somewhere at least. We've made a few missteps, but at least we're going somewhere. And God will reward you. So be a good leader. And that's good character, right? Bad characteristics make bad leaders. Good character always makes good leaders. So until next week, blessed wishes to you. This is Pastor Scott signing off.
You have been listening to Leadership from the Cross with Pastor Scott Thom of Cross Christian Fellowship in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Check out Pastor Scott's ministry training school and his other radio show, No Other Doctrine, by visiting our website at crossfellowship.org. That's crossfellowship.org. Also, you can visit our Facebook page at Facebook.com/Leadership from the Cross.